Hi, I'm Adam Berkmans, and today I'll be showing you how to debone a rabbit. So we're going to start with a whole rabbit while they're farmed. And the first thing we're going to do is cut through the rib cage and the breastbone into the chest. Next, we're going to pop the legs out of their sockets in the hip joints. This allows the rabbit to lay flat, which makes it much easier to debone. We're going to start the deboning process by finding the rib cage and making an incision along the top of the ribs. You'll be making lots of quick, shallow slices to separate the meat from the bone. Keeping the edge of the knife against the rib cage, you're going to pull away the flap of meat with your offhand and continue cutting down along the rib cage, separating the meat from the bones. As you make your way towards the back of the animal, you'll find several floating ribs that must be deboned as well. Once one side of the rib cage is released, you can start on the other side and do the same thing. Remember to take care of those floating ribs. Once both sides of the rib cage are released, we're going to start working to release the upper spine and neck. Continue making quick, shallow slices along the bone until the bones release from the flesh. Once the neck is free and clear, we're going to start working our way down towards the tail along the spine. This part can be very tricky as there's generally very little meat between the spine and the back, especially on wild rabbits. It is very likely that you'll end up with a hole between the two loins, but that's not a big deal. Once you get towards the back end, separate the tailbone from the hips and remove the entire spine and ribcage from the rabbit. From there, we're going to start working on the rear legs. Poke your blade under the hip bone and then start working it around the entire hip to separate it from the meat. Find the hip socket and then use your fingers to find the femur running from the hip to the knee. Run your knife blade along one side of the femur to expose it, then run it along the other side and underneath to isolate the bone. From there, run the knife down along the shin, pushing the meat to either side and isolating the bone, pulling it up. Make use of the point of the blade in the small spaces around the shanks. Once the leg bones are mostly clear, grasp them, then cut off any extraneous meat holding onto the bones. Make your way back to the hip joint and slice away any meat still clinging to the bones. Pull upwards and make the final cut to release the leg and hip bones. Now it's time to do the same thing on the other side, following the exact same process. Make sure to roast all of the bones you've removed and then simmer them for several hours for stock. Once the legs and hips have been removed, it's time to flip the rabbit over and work on the shoulders. We're going to use our fingers to locate the shoulder blade, a small ridge of bone located on the shoulder. Using the tip of the knife, we're going to cut to either side of the shoulder blade and then continue scraping along the shoulder. This is actually one of the trickiest areas to debone, so take your time and move slow. Once you've isolated the shoulder blade, use the tip of your knife to work underneath the shoulder, separating it from the meat. Separate the shoulder all the way down to the first joint. Using the tip of your knife, work your way down the arm bone, separating the meat from the bone just like we did with the rear legs. Now the front shanks are very difficult to remove and are only a tiny little portion of meat. I'll usually just snip off the meat at the elbow and throw the arm bone with the front shanks into the stockpile. Now we're going to repeat the same process on the other shoulder. Deboned rabbits can be stuffed, rolled, and roasted, or cut up for stews, pies, pastas, or stir fries. Lastly, feel around the rabbit to make sure you didn't miss any small bones or shot. And that's how I like to debone a rabbit.